Hello and most welcome to Heidegger 890, and I would today try once more to do a deconstruction on my own, of my very own making, so it will not be up to grade since I am doing the whole thing and no one else. But I had to really emphasize this is the case in the beginning. It won't be perfect from the very start. I will start with an afterword in the limited incorporated because it's a good ground to start. In this one, is it suggested by Derrida that metaphysics can be defined as the enterprise of returning strategically, ideally, to an origin or to a priority thought to be simple, intact, normal, pure, standard, self-identical, in order then to think in terms of derivation, complication, deterioration, accident, and etc. All metaphysicians, from Plato to Rousseau, Descartes to Husserl, have proceeded in this way, conceiving good to be before evil, the positive before negative, the pure before the impure, the simple before the complex, this is important, the essential before the accidental. It's a very important difference and it's seldom mentioned. The imitated before the imitation, something recognized from Plato, of course. And this is not just one metaphysical gesture among others. It is the metaphysical exigency, that which has been the most constant, most profound, and most potent. So this is about metaphysics, and I will do a turn of the table here, and we're going to look at what supposedly go hand with hand of the metaphysics, of this reasoning, of this purity, of this origin, of this self-identical. And once more, let me borrow the camera, we look into the mirror. And who do we see? We see ourselves as the perfection. My self-identical self, my true self. And I start to think that other people see me that way. Somewhere it gets a bit shady. This is not true to reality. The imitation is not what other people see. It might not even be my true self. There's a lot of questions going on. And these questions entered in my mind when I really started to look into the mirror. And I was given a gift of being able, hopefully, I don't know, there is no promise here. It doesn't mean that I will be able, but there is a possibility that I could be able to do my own deconstruction. Well, I have a lot of excuses here, I hear. Let's start on it. I call it the other side of materialism and reductionism. And as you can see, I've been writing in Swedish. It's caused by nervousness, without a doubt. But I will translate. So I'm looking at the other side. So I call it the stubborn ego, or the fixed origo, or starting point, the lockdown, the fixed starting point. And you could go in this deconstruction to an opener, freer, flexible, less decided openness. And this is literal openness. It's more space. It's less defined, and it's not defined beforehand. a priori. So the ego in this case, those illustrations are really horrible, but this is my first one. This could be the ego looking at the object. And as you see, there is a narrowing down. And you can also see this as the ego creating these natural things that are originary. And listen now. All the philosophers of antiquity thought these to be more original, where everything stemmed from. These were the simplest forms. And they were also the constructing parts of the bigger things. The arche, or the essence. These things were also the ousia, or the stain, the ontic entity of permanence. Thank you. So let me do some illustrations here. So I move to the subject side, so to speak. And it's this very sense of narrowing, and that this narrowing, sort of a defining tendency, it is before you even encounter whatever it's out there. I call it presencing in this case. So this is coming, and it brings the narrowness to what is presenting itself. So it gets limited. In the first way, it's beforehand, and the second, it's the limitation are entering or taking away things. And this should also be compared to generalization or universalization. And in universalization, it's more that one takes away everything that sticks out and get a general idea. In this case, it is completely by chance. There is no law or thinking behind what's being taken away. It is constructed beforehand, and therefore it's more like using a tool to make lumps of cheese with some sort of mechanical tool that makes holes, punch holes into the cheese. And you can only punch like 5 things, and you are not looking when you're doing it. Some pieces becomes round just by happenstance, and other pieces because where they're situated on the cheese, maybe at the border of the cheese, are going to be crippled and small. This is the sense of the ego that is sort of pre-made and made simultaneously with me looking at the objects. And usually when we do these things, we look at what we say is the material world. And we've been doing that for quite some time. We'll be looking at typology, we'll be looking into Wittgenstein's a good example. He doesn't bring in the subject directly anyway. And we'll be looking at quantum mechanics, chaos theory, and none of those really pinpoints to the subject, the observer. And my little idea with this deconstruction is maybe if we look at the subject side, we have a double take, and that is twice as good. And also, the second thing I was thinking of is if it's a lockdown on the objective world, where we think that things are ontic, they are predetermined, they have their values, it's a little bit like this idea of Kant, that all the properties somehow are out there. They've always been out there. There's nothing we can do about them. And that very idea will influence me even before I open my eyes in the morning. When I hear the alarm bell, I will have an idea what is going to come to my eyes, so to speak. So there is a pretension of it, and I noticed this a little bit. I did this morning, and it was like thoughts were coming up, and then it was a secondary thinking, looking at the thoughts. And this secondary thinking was automatic and judgmental. And it told me what things were good and what things were bad in a very automatic way. I would say this is this narrowing. It's like a doppelganger going on in my head. I read something maybe 1 year ago when we were living in Jonsered he wrote a book about concentration. His name was Kim, his name was Kim anyway. He was of Indian extraction living in Chicago. I actually contacted him. He said when he was 5 years old, or 6 years old, when he was playing with his sister, and he was enjoying himself, he was self-aware of everything that was happening around him. Actually, he was acutely self-aware, it was perfect. And then this thought just popped up, and it sort of commented everything that he did or thought. And this commenting voice inside of the head often comes beforehand. Sometimes it's afterwards, but sometimes it comes beforehand and tells you what is going to happen or defines it. This is similar to this ego thing. It's sort of a, to use a Derridian word, it's a trace of the ego or something. And it's an annoying thought. It can bother you at cases when you don't want to listen to it. And sometimes it's that voice in your head that wakes you up too early because of some worries. It could be anything. But usually it doesn't have any value. It's not worrying. It's just annoyingly commenting everything. And I think this is what's happening with our awareness. When it's not broad enough, it sort of shrinks and shrivels into this point consciousness. As I mentioned before, it's almost like a black dot, and it's made of its substance, it's arcane, it's unknowing, not knowing. Because once you start looking at it carefully, I did that a couple of days ago, I realized that must be fractal as well. It must be multi-level. It must be as complicated as the surrounding world, because it is an giving and a taking, it's an interaction, or as our friend Rappaport would have said, it's an interpenetration going on constantly, nesting. And this nesting, that is the thing that is actually happening when we are in the thing that presents itself. It's a mutual giving and taking. Just like our hearing, our seeing is sending out at least twice as much as it's taking in. With the visual cortex and the visual nerve, it's sending out 3 times as much. So we are actually doing things with our eyes when we are looking. It's an active process. And I mentioned this point is sort of passive in one way, but the passivity is almost like, instead of going into what's happening, I take my arms like that and I say I don't care, almost. And that is a decision. So somewhere in our lives, or somewhere also in history, maybe in antiquity, something happened and people decided to take a position of not involving themselves. And nota bene, that is in itself a decision. And here, this is the head point, this is the climax of my little deconstruction tryout. And this is exactly what Derrida is revealing when he's doing a deconstruction. Because when you read his deconstructions, often I notice, oh my God, I was too involved in the text in the wrong way. And it was my doing. And if it's my doing, I can sort of stop that a little bit or make it softer. And I can let the text sort of come to me. So I don't grab it in the same way. I think Ian McGilchrist had that two different way of knowing, grasping and understanding. And grasping is more of this controlling. And it's very connected to the hand. The hand, when it grasps something, it's taking something into possession, capturing it. And it's not the same thing to capture something as to let something come to you. This is more, I decide beforehand, even before I really got the chance to know it. It's almost a little bit like judgmental. You are being too judgmental in your reading. It's nothing wrong in being judgmental per se. What is bothering is it rids you of the depth of the text or whatever you encounter. So it's an opportunity for you. And this is what Derrida is saying. I am not forcing an interpretation into your belly or your mouth, but I give you the possibility to choose for yourself. And the only way I can do that is to show your influence in the whole thing. And he shows it in a very lenient, soft way, being very careful not to overstepping his authority, going around, hinting, and then all of a sudden you've noticed, oh, I've been judging too much over the text, and I actually put a distance somewhere. And that is opening up of the text. And this opening up is oddly enough the same as opening up to the surrounding space. It's a relaxation, it's a balancing, and actually it's very joyful. And I only had a chance to try this out once so far. I went down to the cellar, I had a look at my painting collection, and I chose one painting I didn't like, and I sort of let it come to me instead. I know it's a good painting because I heard so, but this time it was different. It came to me. I let it be what it was, and that was so different. I have to admit I still don't like the painting, but I saw it had more depth than I saw originally. And that was quite amazing. That really struck me. It's like I saw it for the first time. And I realized my prejudgmental ideas were not even mine. They were sort of repetitive. Because this is another trait of this ego. Since you're not sending anything out from your perception, your eyes, your ears, or whatever, you're trying to have this passive thing going on. This is a nose, this is an eye. If you're not sending out, you will not get back either. This is very odd. it's entangled. Fractional surfaces are always entangled. And that has to do with the complexity. The complexity is so severe that it resembles consciousness. Something I read many years ago from Braden and Briggs. The complexity in something like a fern is so intricate, so deep, so multi-leveled, so interpenetrative with this iteration, where each level is sort of projecting the next level, and all the small levels are projecting the whole fern. Listen to this. This looks so close to consciousness, and I'm still talking about the object side. Somehow, with fractality, the complexion, the intricacy makes it look like consciousness. And now we can start to see that we are part of the world in quite another take on non-dual. And non-dual, that doesn't mean that we put this equalizing sign between subject and object, which I don't like. And neither is S plus O, which I think is the most common New Age way. It is neither those. It's when you go into the object or objects and you discover, like a painting, you discover the complexion in the painting and you realize it's so complex. It is a mirror image of consciousness or the soul itself. The soul is found in the outer side. So that's another way of finding your own mind, your own spirit, your own unique take on reality. And it's a very beautiful way of finding out everything is interactive. And all of a sudden, all those words that never ever said anything to me, something I heard from my mate Paul, Stratton Taban, all these guys who are very much into English literature, or American literature as well. And they said some things like, oh, the text is speaking to me, it's singing, it's like a concerto, it's like a marvelous landscape view over the Norwegian fjords or something like that. For me, those things have always been just words. Fancy words, I like them, no matter, I like language, but they never meant anything to me. And now I start to realize opening up text reality means widening your perception from the richer flavors of reality, and at the very same time, yourself. And then I realized it was my ego, so to speak. And ego is not something to be kicked at or marginalized or even criticized. It's more this tendency, instead of having an open awareness, it's a narrow take, but it's also a narrow accounting of what things are out there. It's this grasping of things. It's like almost greedy, like Scrooge. It has a little taint of perversion, the perversion that Scrooge had over money and value. It didn't serve him anything good, but he still had a lust for it. And this lust is lack of presence. It is caused by not having access to the world. This is what you became when you don't have anything. This is why Scrooge had this complete fixation with money and value, not for the pleasure, just to keep it. And that's almost like grasping everything. And of course, in the world of academia, we have all this pride of what knowledge do I own, and I heard so many discussions where people try to over-trump each other with their knowledge. And that never rang true to me. Knowledge is not that way. It's not a thing to compete with. It's not that menial, it's not that low a thing, it's not comparable to money. It's something much more enriching, much more complicated, and it grasps you right where you are, and you feel this immediate fantastic intimacy with what you are approaching. And you're not looking at it at a distance anymore. You are in with it. It's this interactive, interwoven weave. And I think this almost looks like a single attractor, creating more beautiful patterns and any time you do it. And this is what I mean with the deconstruction. The things I mean here is, it's not only what you read, what you see, what you enjoy, it's also you yourself. You spring into action, you open up, and all of a sudden you realize a fantastic rich complexity within yourself, a depth you never knew was there. And it's like a little bit deconstructing a part. And then, of course, whenever you want to, you can go back to that point consciousness. There's no law against it. But once you start realizing that is a very narrow, fixed, too stable point, it's the stable point that can only see one meaning, monosemic. It just looks for the origins, it doesn't look for the successes, it doesn't look for wholeness, it tries to have only one thing and then extract the universal from all that little thing. Like those triangles and cubes I showed you, that fixation with Pythagoras, that is, it's just nuts. But when I say nuts, we probably in modern time have our nuts things. We have also this striving for origins. And what the hell, sorry, but in 500 years people will look at the people around us who are monosemic and say, but they're nuts. What are you thinking? Word could have only one meaning. They will be looked upon as the Pythagoreans. Sorry, it's too late for that. And they will be called nuts. So somehow logocentrism constantly reinvents itself. It constantly takes new shapes. And this is the reason, even though it was some definitions coming from Derrida here, we cannot trust those definitions because it's a shapeshifter. And we talked about that tendency of renaming things before. It's very typical. It is how the ego works when it wants to change its clothes instead of changing itself. Rename it and it feels new for a while, but then you will notice it's just the same thing. No, this deconstruction is the real McCoy. It leads you, it opens up the text, and it's like a start of a fantastic adventure. There is one thing I really want to reread after this, and this is actually Othello itself. I read it like 25 years ago. I had great pleasure, but I already feel that my second read will be completely different than it was that time. And that is because myself is opening up, and therefore the text is opening up, and in a way Shakespeare is not dead in that sense. How could he die? He left all those things. We leave a mark on the surroundings. We're not isolated from the surroundings somehow. So fractality has a lot of opening up tendency. So it's deconstruction from a neurological and mathematical perspective. So I say thank you. This is my first deconstruction in public, at least with a listener. And I say thank you very much to Kalle as well, having the patience, and have a very good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.